Good morning, everyone. And thank you for coming. I had expected more people, but obviously my expectations were not met. Okay. I can only hope that some people will come in later. This is a very important part of library's history and your access to information. And it's very important. We're at a crossing point right now, and how we manage it will determine where we go in the future. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Imperato, the Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs and Chief Academic Officer, who will say a few words before we bring up our speaker.
Good morning, everyone. I think, as many of you know, we're entering a period of time when academic institutions are facing financial difficulties in general, but particularly with regard to the fees being charged by these very large transnational publishers who over the years have acquired a number of journals. Some of them now have 2,000 in their stable, some of them even more than that. And as a consequence, they're able to extract from universities on a progressive scale more and more fees for subscribing to their group of journals, and have been resistant until now. They're beginning to break on this, allowing us to cherry pick given journals that are more appropriate for us. Elsevier is one of the largest of these publishers, but there are others, including Spring and Nature, McGraw-Hill, Lippincott, and several others. So this is not an issue that's going to go away. And we're very grateful for the Provost office in taking recognition of this challenging problem throughout the SUNY system. And so today we're grateful to Kerry Hatch, who's the Interim Senior Associate Provost for the SUNY System Administration, for coming down here to Downstate to discuss this matter in general and to take any questions which any of you may have. So do you want to make a formal introduction to Kerry Hatch, or do you think I covered it? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Imperato. Let me just point out that this presentation is being live streamed and it's being recorded and will be available on the YouTube channel. And you can also check out the library's social media links for more information. And let me just bring up Kerry Hatch. He's the Interim Senior Associate Provost for SUNY System Administration and a very important part of the negotiations team. Welcome, Carey.
So yes, my name's Kerry Hatch, Interim Senior Associate Provost. That means I've got a lot of responsibilities right now, but what I've started with within SUNY was libraries. And I still have that within my portfolio. And it's really the part that I hold most dear. And honestly, the success that I've had at SUNY is because I got into libraries when the digital wave first hit. And remember, I mean, if you folks remember, when we first started getting electronic journals, we were like, electronic journals, maybe 10, 15% of the collection, that's all it's ever going to amount to. Years later, I challenge you to find a current print journal in your library, where most of the content we're buying is now digital. I was involved in the first negotiation with Elsevier back, about 20 years ago. So I've gone through all of the negotiations with Elsevier, and it's kind of like a Groundhog Day for me when we hit this point. So what I wanted to do is kind of tell you where we are, because I do think we're at a different point and looking at things a little bit differently. And part of that is because we are also looking at, hopefully you're aware that we have an open access policy out, that every state-operated campus is supposed to be creating an open access policy that also includes repositories. We're building infrastructure and policy to help support open access, which kind of is what we're trying to do on the library side to push against the profit that the commercial publishers are now producing that we find increasingly hard to afford. So I assume most of you are SUNY personnel. If you're not, you can still participate. But really want to kind of keep some of this information tight and close. So please consider it confidential. And first off, show of hands, who here is faculty? Perfect. Wonderful. Okay. Because we need to engage faculty more than we have in the past in this conversation. Traditionally, what we've done in the Elsevier negotiations has been a library internal negotiation. And it's been a library internal conversation. Honestly, the way it usually works is we negotiate with Elsevier, try to get to a price point that we can accept, and then we turn ourselves inward and we negotiate internally to say, okay, how are we going to carve that expenditure up among all of our institutions? What can system kick in? And we try and piece it together. Normally, it's a very long process, and we actually started earlier this year than we normally do. So just to give you an idea of what we're trying to do today, kind of give you an understanding of the current agreement and costs for Science Direct, who's on the negotiations committee, and you can feel free to contact any of them. I was supposed to be joined by Heath Martin from Stony Brook, who was here today, but he couldn't make it, unfortunately. We're going to talk a little bit about how that relates to our open access initiative and what we're doing in that space. I really want to hear from you about what you're thinking about regarding access specifically to Science Direct, but also electronic content, the evolving role of the library, and your need for access to information. So our contract expires December 31, 2019. Normally what happens in our Elsevier negotiations, it goes right to the bitter end. So our contract didn't get signed until January last time. We backdated the contract so we had could hit this date. But it's part of Elsevier's negotiation strategy to kind of drag things out as long as possible. We've seen that over and over again. We want to brief you because the negotiations are underway. We'll talk about where we are on that. Hopefully you've heard about the University of California system, who walked away from Elsevier and their deal with Elsevier. That's having significant impact in the way people are starting to think about their contracts for big deals. If the University of California can walk away, it gives us reason to think that there are other options and there might be opportunities to kind of break the cycle that we're in of basically being beholden to the commercial publishers. It's not just the University of California. Countries over in the European Union generally have countrywide contracts with companies like Elsevier, and those contracts are also starting to fall apart. We anticipate that higher education media will be watching what we're doing. The University of California got a lot of press. We assume that we can get press if we want it from folks like Inside Higher Education and others. And it's something we're thinking about in terms of how much do we leverage that, or how much do we just let it kind of slide, and we'll answer questions when they come. We do hope for a successful negotiation. I don't know what that is going to entail, but we do hope that we can retain access to the content that you currently have. So it's a big deal subscription. That basically means we pay a flat rate to Elsevier. Right now it's about $9.5 million a year that we're paying to Elsevier for access to Science Direct. It's a lot of money. The big deal things usually refer to publisher journals. Elsevier is not the only one we've got, but it is our biggest. Typically it's a multi-year deal with annual inflation rates. This is one area we negotiate hard on as inflation, but right now, like I said, we're at $9.5 million. We first signed with Elsevier, it was about a $3 million deal. They've continued to, if you increase costs by 5% a year, it doesn't take long before you're into big money. They've also added a lot of content. They've bought other journals, they've bought other collections, and they've continued to add. So it is something that we have bought into over the course of time, and now we look back and go, wow, $9.5 million is a lot of And that's, over a 5-year deal. Normally we can get like 2% a year for 2 or 3 years, and then it jumps back up to 4 or 5. So you start to really watch the cost ratchet up. We have a negotiating team who's working on the negotiations. I'm not going to read you all of the folks here. You'll see that they are primarily librarians. We are looking to add some faculty representatives as we get a little bit deeper into the process. So part of the conversation we'd like to have with you folks is if anybody's interested, let us know. We do think it's important to hear from faculty, obviously, as we go forward with this. Again, we've kept the conversation too tightly confined in the libraries for too long, and I think we really need to open it up a bit more. Here's our timeline. We had an initial meeting with Elsevier back in December, and basically said, here's where we want to be. We want to be more, we want to start earlier than we did last time. We don't like dragging it off into December. So we started early. Basically, we said, okay, we've got a year to get this negotiation done. Still stalling a little bit. We had a second meeting scheduled for February 22nd. The vendor canceled that meeting. Elsevier canceled that. Didn't really tell us why. And that took place right around the time when the information about the University of California got out. So we called up our friends at the University of California and said, hey, what happened? So we got some good insight into how their negotiations went, as much as they could tell us. I mean, they couldn't divulge everything. We understood what they were asking for in their contract. We understood where some of the sticking points were. And we understood where they were thinking in terms of, okay, if we do lose access to this content, how do we put things back in place as well as we can to get the information we need? So we've been continuing those conversations with the University of California. And we had a meeting on March 18th. We canceled that meeting because we had asked Elsevier to come with us with some information, and they didn't get it to us. So we said, all right, there's no point in the meeting. On April 9th, we had a meeting. We popped in a conference call with our Vice Chancellor for Research and Economic Development, Grace Wong, and all of the Vice Presidents for Research from our campuses. And we gave basically the VPRs information about where we were in the negotiation. We are going to go back to the VPRs in another month, kind of update them on where we are, and we'll continue to keep them in the loop. We do view them as a significant stakeholder in this process. We've also started to engage the University Faculty Senate more directly. So a presentation was given at the spring plenary meeting, and the Operations Committee has put forward a statement basically supporting the negotiation team, supporting their colleagues at the University of California and what they did in their approach to Elsevier, and supporting the negotiations committee in its efforts to get us to a new and more equitable contract. We are scheduled to meet with, we're having these presentations throughout the SUNY system. We had one at Albany, Buffalo State, University of Buffalo, Stony Brook. We'll be doing SUNY Poly, SUNY Binghamton in the next couple of weeks. And we're going to go back out in the fall after we get through some of the summer months and negotiations during the summer to update folks again. Our next scheduled meeting with Elsevier is on June 3rd. Again, we're still waiting for information, and we are debating about whether or not to cancel that meeting if we don't get the information that we've requested. Our assumption is we're going to basically go into serious negotiations July through November. And obviously in December, our contract expires. So part of what I'd like to get to today is just a better sense from you folks of what you'd like to see in that negotiation. So at any point in time, if you've got questions or comments, or we can wait till the end. But what we're really trying to get a better sense of is how important is the access to the information? How quickly do you need it? Are there things you're willing to go without, or do we have to, or is this information so critical that we have to figure out a way to maintain the level of access that we currently do, even though it's going to cost us a lot of money? So just to give you an overall perspective, Elsevier makes up about 25% of our overall spend on journals. $9.5 million a year. And I will tell you that we've actually seen, we don't have direct correlation data, but those costs keep going up, library staff keep going down. You have to trade balance, you have to trade things off. I mean, Downstate's kind of in a unique position because you are focused on science and medicine. Our comprehensive colleges or university centers, what we're doing is stealing from the arts and humanities, social sciences to pay for the scientific information. That's just the way it's worked. And it continues to be that way. This, I don't have to tell you our campuses are financially stressed. This is not a good period of time for the State University of New York. We do continue to get reasonable state support, but it's not enough to really keep us moving forward in the way that we need. And we have to obviously keep our tuition at a reasonable level so that we can educate the people we're supposed to educate. Our assumption is that Elsevier is double dipping. And what that means is Elsevier does have journals where they will accept open access articles in, but they charge faculty members to do that. Those charges can range anywhere from $2,000 to $13,000 depending upon the journal. We just ran some calculations. That last bullet scared the heck out of us because we weren't really paying attention about how our faculty were being charged article processing fees. And now that we've looked at it from since 2000, SUNY faculty have paid $8.1 million to Elsevier in article processing charges, and that's in addition to the $9 million we're paying them annually for subscriptions.
And then does probably not include the open access that's actually paid for by the NIH for papers associated with federally funded.
Yeah. So there's.
That might be worth counting too, because that's a lot of money, especially in the life sciences.
Yeah, so these are the things we're just starting to get a handle on in terms of looking at the bigger picture of what Elsevier is doing. Our goals in the negotiation, obviously to reduce our annual expenditure. That's always our goal in a negotiation with Elsevier. It's always our goal in all of our negotiations. It is very difficult to go to a vendor who's getting money, getting revenue, and saying, hey, we want you to take less revenue because we're hurting. Not a real strong negotiating stand. We've never had success with that one, but we're going to try. This might be a very different kind of situation. They're probably going to ding us on access, but when we look at the journals that are actually used, we got 2,000 journals. There's a lot of those that are very lightly used. There are obviously those that are very heavily used as well. We do want to maintain access to the current holdings, so that's part of our goal with the negotiation. But we also want to grow support for open access publishing. So we are having conversations, from our internal perspective of, all right, so rather than paying $8.1 million in APCs, can we cut a deal with Elsevier where that cost is less, or that APC gets given back to us as a credit? Something along those lines so that we're not paying for things twice. And we're trying to grow open access at the same time. These are the goals, obviously, why we're doing this. The rising costs, we just can't afford it. It just takes up too much of our financial resources. We also believe authors should maintain copyright. So part of the reason we have our open access policy is to take the content that's created here on campuses, research of our faculty, and make it openly available by having authors basically reclaim copyright and not turning it over exclusively to the commercial publishers. The goals for open access are part of our policy moving forward to really start to expand access to all of the kind of content that we create within the university. We are looking part of what's really interesting for me is thinking about the money that we spend on Elsevier. And thinking about the different kind of approaches we could take to scholarly publishing if we just took part of that money and reinvested it into different infrastructure and services to support scholarship and publishing on the campuses, I think it would take us a long way. So we're actually looking at the system office Out of that $9.5 million, the SUNY system office pays about $600,000 a year. If the deal doesn't go down, the $600,000 is available. We would like to start to put that into infrastructure to support scholarly publishing in a different way within the university. So we're having that kind of conversation as well. This is who Elsevier is. They had $3.2 billion in revenue. That's 7% higher than it was in 2016. So in 1 year, their profit went up 20% higher than 2015. So you look at their revenues grow exponentially. Their profit margin is about 40%. So there is room to move in that space. They haven't been willing to do it. By our estimates, they're about 17%. They basically make up about 17% of the peer-reviewed journal articles worldwide. So they are a major player. In North America, makes up about 42% of their articles, of their revenue. SUNY is a fairly significant player. We publish a lot of our faculty publish in Elsevier journals. So we've got about 27,000 articles that were published by SUNY faculty in the last, I think that's actually 2010 to 2019. So we've been pretty active in that space. And again, a lot of conversations on campuses about if you're really going to change the way scholarly publishing works, you have to change promotion and tenure. That's the holy grail. I don't know if we're ever going to get there, but I think having these kind of conversations and really starting to think about, okay, do we need to really think differently about how we're providing the incentives we're providing to faculty members and how it reinforces a lot of this behavior. So, end of the official slide deck. Conversation, questions, comments, concerns? Yes, sir.
So if you negotiate costs.
Hang on, I got to bring the mic over.
So your committee negotiates the cost, but then the local campuses decide what they buy.
Yeah. Well, we're the State University of New York,
Right.
So what we do.
So what I'm getting at, though, is are you also considering merging libraries? And so, for example, SUNY Buffalo and Downstate may have a similar collection, or Buffalo may have something that we don't, and vice versa. It would be great to be able to electronically click, and faculty really don't care where the journal resides. They just want to have access to it. Is that part of the negotiation?
No, because every institution is separate and distinct. We have not talked about, we have opportunities to look at our journal collections and within the spend that we have. So understand the way this contract came into place, long time ago, we had print journal subscriptions, and Elsevier said, we got them electronic now. You pay X amount of dollars for print journal subscription, we'll give you the electronic for what you're paying, plus 8% for the electronic fee, And then some other magic happened later on. But everything was based on the print journal subscription. We can move things around. We can say within the spend that we have, we can move titles in and out. And campuses can move titles in and out, but we're locked into that traditional, here's what we did, and here's what where the subscriptions sit. It's a license, because we don't own it. If it was print, we could move and do whatever we want, because we own it if it's in print. All the electronic stuff, it's a license. So we're locked into the contractual license terms that they give us, which bind us into this kind of agreement.
Can't the negotiations say you want to redefine the license?
Well, that's part of what we're trying to do, is we redefine the license, reduce the cost. Yeah. Ultimately, it comes down to, I don't necessarily care what the model is as long as I can drop the cost. Another thing I want folks to understand is, because we're the State University of New York, it's always opt-in. Campuses opt in or opt out of these deals, right? So Elsevier used to be a university-wide agreement. Now we have, I think, 3 or 4 campuses that have opted out, including Upstate Medical Center. So Upstate Medical Center has opted out of the agreement. They opted out about on the last contract cycle, so over 5 years ago.
Could you comment on how that total cost with Elsevier is apportioned out to the different campuses? Because it's not being paid for out of central funds, I assume.
Every campus who is participating pays into it. The model has varied over the years to kind of keep the deal together and to make certain players happy and based on usage. So it started based on subscription. So Downstate started with X number of dollars in spend in print subscription. That's what the basis was in the beginning. Over the course of time, what we started to do was to even it out a little bit more and say, gee, the University of Buffalo is really slamming it in usage. They got to pay more than some of the other institutions. So we've adjusted costs based on downloads. Now, the scary thing about downloads is they're not reflective of usage, because one faculty member might basically just have a file somewhere that lists links to all of the articles that they like, and rather than downloading them once and keeping them on their hard drive, they just click on the link and go get it. That counts as a download. So what we actually see is when you dig down into the data, a download isn't really a download that's down. It could be multiple uses from a single person looking at the article multiple times.
So if a campus, such as Syracuse, opts out, the way this has been working is that SUNY provides the campuses with X amount of financial support annually, and then deducts the amount of money that is going to pay for these subscriptions before the subsidy arrives on campus. So if one opts out, suppose Downstate opted out of Elsevier,
Okay.
which we're not likely to do, but suppose we did, would that amount of money then be restored and given to us as part of our subsidy, or we wouldn't get anything out of that deal?
My understanding, the way it works is you get your campus funds, and campus funds come in quarterly allocations or whatever, depending. We wait until, I think, the third quarter before we go and hit your recharge account for all the money we take back. So we give it to you, and then we take it back. Yeah.
You wouldn't take it back?
Nope. Nope, it would come off the recharge schedule, so the money would stay on campus.
Maybe.
Behind you?
So when Upstate opted out, did that mean all of the rest of us paid more for the contract, or was the contract price lowered because we had fewer campuses using it?
Kind of a combination of both.
Combination.
Yeah. There was an uptick in cost associated with Upstate opting out.
On a broader scale, have you, or is it too early to tell, how Elsevier's negotiating behavior has changed in the wake of the UW walkout and the decisions on the part of the EU countries? Are they perhaps looking to increase fees on those campuses and systems that remain? Or are they worried about others potentially walking away and therefore more willing perhaps to lower some of the fees? And related to that, has the negotiating team studied whether walking away might in fact be viable in the case of SUNY?
We haven't met with Elsevier reps since UC walked away. But the first times we met, obviously, they knew what was going on in the University of California system. We haven't seen, at that point in time, we didn't see much change in behavior. Like I said, it was kind of like Groundhog Day. It's like, I've seen this presentation before. I know the value of your journals and how scholarly communication is increasing every year. I've seen all that. So I think it has to change. I just think the reality has to start to sink in that, if they can't land the University of California and they can't land New York State, SUNY system, that's a major statement. So, I mean, we are talking about, is it should we be considering walking away? But that's part of the reason we're having these conversations, because we can't do that based on a handful of librarians having a negotiation with Elsevier without really understanding what the impact is. That's why we're engaging the vice presidents for research, trying to reach out to faculty, engaging the faculty senate. We've never done this kind of communication before because we do think it's an appropriate time to have this level of conversation.
So it strikes me that if the costs get passed on to the remaining campuses in a contract, this is going to snowball and put the cost of these subscriptions out of reach even faster. And so with that in mind, I think SUNY needs to be sort of prepared to walk away. And if you're prepared to walk away, then you have the leverage back, and things like a unified library ought to be back in play. You're not tweaking an existing contract any longer, right? If you're prepared to walk away entirely, you should be free to totally redo the design of this thing. And I think that's really the question. I can't tell because we're only one campus, but I would bet you that if you have even one or two other campuses walking away, or you get one of the major university centers walking away, that'll be the tipping point where now even if Downstate had the ability to scratch resources together, we're going to say we're out, and this mushrooms where every other one of the smaller campuses is going to be forced out.
I'll pass the mic to.
So I have one question about what would actually happen if we did opt out. So SUNY would have to pay for one institution for one copy of these journals, and then we could get the copies that we want through interlibrary loan or, you know, the Iliad system. So as long as we paid for the sort of the fastest access to the journal, so you can get it the next day, it could be a problem for some people, you know, because when you're following a train of thought, you read various journals and they quote other papers, and then you need to go and click on that paper and read it right away. Otherwise, your train of thought stops. Yeah. But if you can just sort of keep a list of journals and request them, and you get them the next day, I think that might sort of work. But the thing is that SUNY would have to pay for one copy anyway, so that it could be distributed throughout all the campuses through the Iliad system.
We're thinking about that. We're also looking at contracts with companies like Preprint Desk, where you can basically buy an article on demand. So where we don't necessarily even have to keep the journal, you can just buy an article when you need it. So taking the money we currently spend on Elsevier, putting it more into document delivery on demand, looking at those kind of systems. Mo is actually showing me what the University of California system has been passing around, alternative access to Elsevier. You know, there are ways you can use Google Scholar to look for open scholarship and open articles. You can get it from your library through document delivery. You can use your network of faculty. We all know that that goes on all the time. Might not be the most legal thing, and you know, there are other mechanisms to get information that we won't talk about because they are illegal. But you know, there are ways to do it. I will tell you the one thing that is out there as well, and Upstate took advantage of it. The New York State Library has access to Science Direct. New York State Library provides access to all New York State employees. SUNY Downstate employees are New York State employees, so there's an avenue there as well. So there are some things we can do to plug in and make things fairly good. I don't think it's going to be as good as what you have now. Yes, sir.
Make several comments. One is the problem with buying on demand is that oftentimes you just want to skim an article.
I'm sorry, I can't hear the volume.
The problem with buying on demand is that oftentimes you just want to look at it quickly, and when you do that, you realize that it's not what you thought it was, and so you really don't want to buy it.
Right.
But
So
also with
$30.
document delivery, speed is, I want to emphasize what Nick was saying, speed of access is critical. And I have a question, how unique is our licensing arrangement currently relative to other state universities like University of California? Were they considered to be completely separate entities, or did they have some facsimile of a unified library?
No, they had the University of California Digital Library, which negotiated their deal. I think it was, just to give you perspective, their deal cost about 12 mil a year, something like that. Ours is about 9.5. So when you look at University of California, they're all research institutions. They're paying 12 million. We've got, a handful of research institutions within the SUNY system, and we're paying 9. That's a big chunk of revenue for Elsevier. Elsevier is always going to get a good chunk of money. No matter what we do, we're always going to have to buy content from Elsevier. We're going to either go one-off journal article, one-off journals, or we're going to buy bundled collections. But they're going to make money, so I don't want anybody to feel bad for them, because when we walk away, we're not walking away with $9.5 million in our back pocket. It's going to go to Elsevier in different forms, and there'll be some left we might be able to reinvest.
Is there any sense of how recent
The University of California?
Yeah, in other
Elsevier
words,
hasn't turned it off yet.
oh, really?
Oh, right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And we're waiting for the big scream to come from California when it actually happens. So that is a big question for us. It's like, well, California hasn't heard from their faculty yet because it hasn't been shut off yet. So that's interesting.
Thank you. Could you tell us a little bit more about the New York State Library and how we would actually access the journals that way? Is it quick? Is it cumbersome? Is it, if we had that access, why do we even need
Mohammed?
anything?
Mohammed has an answer for you.
The instructions to accessing the New York State Library has been posted on the library's website since January. Is it, Chris? Since January? Since January of this year. Please.
Yeah, so it's really a matter of filling out a form, basically getting on their list of people, and then using their electronic web pages to get access to not only Elsevier, but other content as well.
And just so you know, I went through the process of registering with the state library, and they got back to me within a day and a half or 2 days and they mailed me a library card, but then they gave me an email that said, here's your number and login. So it took about 2 days for me to get access.
I just wonder if there's been any talk about how any of this, or newer type of structures would affect accreditation. Some of the departments in our college were wondering about how that might affect students having access to certain materials in a different way. I know it's a mystery how Middle States reviews that, but I didn't know if anybody had any concerns about that.
Isn't really an area we've talked about. Our assumption is that campuses, like if we're not doing the big recharges, campuses will have the money that they spent on the collection prior to that. They'll be able to invest in collections that make sense to support the curriculum and the faculty research to the best of their ability with the dollars that they have available. It'll just be, you're just going to have to be very, it'll be more management on the part of the library. So instead of just clicking a button and saying, okay, boom, I got 2,000 journal articles, you're going to have to go back to, I really only want these 40, and I'm going to pay for those 40.
Follow-up comment. The LCME has very specific criteria with regard to the library resources that are necessary. No doubt those will be changed over time, given what's happening. But right now, we are going into an LCME site visit in 2021, and that criterion is there. And so we have to maintain a certain level of access for our students and faculty to these digital sources of information. Middle States, if LCME is at 10,000 feet, Middle States is at 30,000 feet. And we just went through our accreditation, and it's good until 2024. They're less concerned about getting down into the weeds with regard to library resources. I just wanted to make those comments to clarify what has been brought up.
I know this morning's talk is about journals from Elsevier, but Elsevier also has a great collection of textbooks on clinical key. Is this going to be affected at all?
No. No. Different package.
It's interesting that you're linking the costs that faculty shoulder for making an article open access to the package. and given that NIH pays a great deal to make articles open access, this would not be fast, but I mean, might NIH become a partner in trying to help get the costs overall down for this kind of information? And that obviously means our elected officials, but it seems like that's a reasonable approach. I don't know where it'll end up, but it's an interesting one.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach. And actually, when we were at Albany, we also had a conversation about approaching the state because California is starting to make some moves about requiring faculty members to publish open access or use their repositories as well. So kind of codifying some of that, maybe getting a little bit more leverage. And again, New York and California kind of present an interesting dynamic of two fairly progressive states with significant investment in public higher education. Yes, sir.
I just want to make a comment about when you say requiring faculty to publish open access. If it costs $2,000 and the individual doesn't have a grant, they're not going to do it.
Right.
So what most faculty will request a journal through the interlibrary loan system. That means the library pays for it, not the individual who's requesting it. So, I mean, we were talking about, are you willing to dig into your pocket and slap down $15 to read this particular paper, and then you realize it's not what you thought it was. But in actual fact, the library is going to be bearing the cost of that. At least that's the way it works at the moment.
Yeah, that is the way it works.
I just want to clarify, the NIH open access is really not that open. It's embargoed, so you have to deposit the paper in PubMed Central right away, but it's not available to the public for a year.
Right.
So it's not really open access.
And then if we want to put a similar copy in our repository, we have to also go with that embargo period. Can you use a microphone? Oh, I said that if we use our repository, we also have to abide by the embargo period, which, can become, that's a labor issue at a certain point in time, unless we can automate the process of turning off the embargo.
If you deposit your article into a SUNY repository, is it free to the author to deposit it into a SUNY open access? I mean, I think it should be.
As of today, we have a repository at the system level that is currently completely free. We are looking at that in terms of it's DSpace. It's not terribly attractive or easy to use. We are talking to the vendor that hosts it for us about maybe changing it up a bit to make it more attractive. There might be costs, and what we're concerned about is scholarly articles, print publications, not a problem. Like, we can do that free till the cows come home. You want to start to do open data, you want to start to do video, you want to start to do virtual reality files, and now I got significant costs we got to start to take a look at. So a lot of depends in that kind of space, just because scholarship isn't going to continue to just be words on paper or electronic words. It's going to be a lot of different kind of content. We want to be able to support that, but there's costs associated with that. And again, that's where shifting some resources from buying a collection from some external provider to providing an infrastructure to support creation of our own materials and distributing those materials. That's a shift we're looking at and saying, how do we actually start to make that shift? So where our libraries and our library infrastructure are supporting scholarly creations throughout the system. And again, it's not just books, it's not just journal articles, it's music, it's video, it's all kinds of content that faculty are creating on our campuses that are important works.
I'm glad the conversation is shifting towards open access. That invitation has also been on the library's webpage since January, inviting faculty members to be part of the discussion. If you are interested, please see me afterwards. We are putting together a group of people, a workforce, to develop a policy that's specific to this campus. So you can see me, or you can see my colleague, Greg Hedrick, who is also on the open access team. right? But I'm glad it's shifting to this.
So, what do you, any particular perspectives about what it is we should, what would you like to see as an end result?
I think I'd like to see us get to wherever we need to be when it comes to our heft vis-a-vis Elsevier to be considered up there, you know, in the big leagues of the other state university systems. It sounds like there's still, and I'm not quite clear on the details, but it sounds like there's still quite a bit of fragmentation and that we're being treated to some extent as independent campuses. You know, I'd like to see whatever centralization is required to get around that issue so that we're taken, you know, more seriously by Elsevier and perhaps by the other publishing giants. And I realize that because each campus has a tradition of independence, that may be difficult. You know, it's not going to happen overnight, obviously, but, you know, there's big money involved, and it seems like we should be able to try to at least make some headway in that direction.
I agree totally, and I would say that maybe we need to, even now that we're early in the negotiation, maybe we should signal that if necessary, SUNY as a system will walk. And maybe that's what Elsevier needs to know. And I think the way to move forward is with a unified library, or at least if not across all of the 50 somewhat SUNY campuses, at least, for example, the 4 major medical centers where the journal collection is really going to overlap. But I would suggest signaling that we're going to do that early in the process, maybe especially since University of California has essentially done that, and especially given what's going on in Europe.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, what's interesting about the centralization piece, we're in the process now of implementing a new library services platform. So a completely new way to manage our library resources. And it is much more centralized than our previous system where every campus had its own instance of a library management system. In this case, it's one system, one database, a lot of shared policies that can be managed by a smaller cohort of resource people, basically doing the heavy lift that has previously been distributed. So we've started to move in that direction to a certain extent. But I think you're right. We need to think a little bit more broadly about, okay, what does it look like as a library system rather than a system of libraries?
So one way of getting leverage is to sort of distribute ways around this if we didn't have Elsevier, so that the faculty could begin to see what it was like and begin to use it. And then Elsevier would see that there is an alternative to capitulating to them. And that might be a way to go, I think.
Okay.
I think that we also underestimate the impact of really a spectacular library that's available to the system. I think every campus having to work within its own constraints, and we do an amazing job here with the limited resources we have. I mean, I'll speak for myself. I would pay a significant annual fee for access to the best library on the earth. And I imagine we could touch students for $10 a year or whatever, and across a large population of students, there's some additional money that could really help amplify. But now if every campus in SUNY has access to everything that we would have, I think it enriches everybody, especially these programs about moving students from undergraduate to graduate or community college to the 4 years. I think we enable a lot of that traffic if we increase the resources available on some of these campuses that in no way have the resources. Not that we're rich, but we're doing a better job with some of the life sciences journals than a lot of the other 2- and 4-year schools are able to do.
Sure. Okay. Other comments, questions?
Having great library access is really critical for the research enterprise. So is there a role for the Research Foundation in contributing to an effort? I mean, research is sort of transcends that organization as well. So thoughts on that? We've tried that, every negotiation. What the Research Foundation, the Central Research Foundation does is basically it's a financial management entity
that distributes money to campuses. So it brings the money in and then it pushes the money back out to the campuses. So the money still comes to the campus. How research foundation dollars get used on individual campuses, or, for library access, is up to the individual campus. All the Research Foundation does is push money out to the individual campuses. At least that's what they've told us when we went and asked, like, if the Research Foundation would be willing to contribute.
It sounds like there's sort of no unified or uniform policy, like it's really discretionary for the campus.
No, there isn't. No. I mean, the SUNY system is based on campus autonomy. Individual campuses deal with things that as best they can in ways that suit their mission, and how they, what their the populations they serve. And it's just who we are as a system. I think we are trying to think a little bit differently, especially I think in the libraries. Just to give you an example, that library services platform that we're implementing now, it's the first time in SUNY's history where entities will be working on a single platform across all the campuses with a single database. Our tradition has always been, we're going to implement Banner. Downstate, you implement your version of Banner, and Upstate, you do whatever you want with your version, and they're all completely different. That's been our tradition. And obviously now as we try and collect data, or campuses try and send us data that we can collect and analyze, we recognize the folly of some of that activity, because it's hard work on everybody's part and no one can maintain it anymore. So thinking about, and I agree with thinking about the ideas of starting to think about what things can you start to centralize as systems and technologies and infrastructure that serve all the campuses appropriately. We need to start to think about that a little bit harder. And I think library collections and library services are probably going to be at the tip of that. And I think this conversation is really going to help drive that. And I know we're at time, and I know our good colleague here who's doing the video has got to run across the street. So I think we're going to have to wrap it up. Folks in the library know how to get a hold of me. If anybody wants to reach out at any point in time, feel free. It's Carey, Carey.hatch@suny.edu. So it's basically my name with @suny.edu. Okay?
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and it's live stream. It's going to be available on the YouTube channel too, so I can send you links. I'll put it in the library's webpage so you can find it.